Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And today we're talking about getting students back on track. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was great. I think I've talked a lot on this podcast before about an organization called Escala that do training opportunities or professional development for faculty around culturally responsive teaching. Mm-hmm. And I'm taking part in this kind of 6-week, maybe it's not, a 12-week sort of long-running workshop about specifically those things in STEM-related disciplines. And
cool.
It's been really positive because I have kind of been falling into a little bit of a bitterness hole at times with this semester, and it's just really good. I forget about how invigorating it is to sort of talk to other people and hear other cool things people are doing. And the biggest thing I think they do for me is just like how much difference a little mindset shift can change things. And they're very asset-based.
That's awesome. Mindset change for you or for the students or what are you
for me, I
on?
think. And even this semester when I went in and they were like talking about asset-based, I was like, you're not going to asset-base me this semester because I am not feeling it. And then I was like, oh no, I am. I'm really cheerful and students are great and they're so great. So I think it's just a very cheerful, positive experience. So I was into it. And I definitely appreciate, I appreciate them full stop because they're amazing. But this being very STEM focused, it really like narrows in on things like labs and problem solving. And so I think that's super helpful.
Oh, that's fantastic. That sounds really great. I didn't know you were doing that.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Yeah. And I know because we've both had great experiences with Escala before. So that's awesome. You're doing this next thing with them.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think, I don't know why I'm totally derailing it, sorry, but I think we talked on here about that balance between cutting things out and minimizing stuff that you do. Uh-huh. You know, especially for me this semester with life being a little chaotic with the kids. But then that can also be a bad thing, right? Because you can take away some things that can be actually inspiring and invigorating. So kind of finding that balance is tricky.
So being sure to keep some things that are really inspiring. Yeah, I love that.
Right. So tell me, what about your week? How was that?
My week is good. This next upcoming week is when we're starting face-to-face labs for my class. And so we've got everything ready. I think we're good to go. And I'm really excited to get the students actually in the lab and doing things. And one thing that we're doing that I haven't done before, but I'm excited to try is some students are doing the lab fully virtually. And others, of course, will, have to stay home for quarantining at various points in time. So we're having the ones who are doing the lab virtually Zoom in to lab, and they have a group. So like each in the lab physically, we have a bunch of iPads, and they can see what's going on and work and help people figure out calculations and interpret data. I'm just imagining these
stuff, like, do you remember like there's some cartoon that had like a brain in a jar?
Oh, yeah.
Or like a head. It's like the iPad is like this like head you're carrying around and putting. That's awesome. That's
totally
cool.
Yeah. So I think it'll be really cool. I'm hoping that they'll be able to like help figure out, okay, let's decide how we're going to digest our orange peel or whatever, together. Ooh. And then whoever's in the lab will actually be the hands to do it. So I'm excited to see how it goes. And I'm really excited, to get people doing hands-on stuff. So,
well, do you know what's funny? Because I actually have quite a few students that are in your class.
Oh, yes.
And everyone has been talking with great excitement about this.
Oh, good.
They're
really?
Super stoked and like, yeah, like things are looking up because I'm going to be getting back in to Claire's class. And so there's a lot of positivity about it. So, I think
that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that.
And I think it's funny, the students, I think it seems like a lot of them really want to get back in there. And then also having like a point in their day that they have to be somewhere is also really like important to them.
I think so. And a lot of them have been saying like, oh, because we did some labs virtually so far. And, I made little videos of them with my student assistant. But, a lot of the students in the class were saying, gosh, it kind of just makes me miss that I didn't get to do that experiment, So that's too bad. So I'm hoping that they'll be excited. So that's good to hear.
That's awesome.
That you're
okay, cool.
That.
Yes, no, you're going to be well received next week.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention is just kind of a PSA about a Cottrell Scholar webinar. So if this is a award that people can apply for if they're chemistry, physics, or astronomy faculty who started their first faculty position in 2018. And it's an award that's $100,000 to do a scholarly research project and an educational project. And it also kind of inducts you into a group of people that meet. They have regular meetings beyond the time period of your award to talk about being effective teacher scholars. So anyway, if any of our listeners are interested in that or know anyone who's interested in that, there's a webinar that has some program info and tips for effective proposal preparation. One of them is on March 31st from noon to 1 Eastern Time, and another's Friday, April 2nd from 2 to 3 Eastern Time, and we'll put the links for that in the show notes.
And wait, did you say how we know about the Cottrell Scholar Award?
So I got the Cottrell Scholar Award a couple years ago, and it was
Mm-hmm.
really cool. I went to my first Cottrell Scholar conference last summer, and it was really a really inspiring group of people to work with. So,
and was the webinar helpful? Did you do the
I
webinar?
didn't know about the webinar when I was applying, but I did read every single piece of information I could get about what they were looking for. So hopefully some of those are condensed into this webinar. I think they are.
That would be cool. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. And I also have a quote for us today.
Oh, sweet. Okay, tell us your quote.
So it's kind of two quotes from the same person, Tony Robbins, super awesome quote guy. One of them is, your past doesn't equal your future. And the other, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten.
Dude, I want to put those on postcards and mail them to my students.
Yeah, great idea.
I
That'd
definitely
be fun.
Right. I mean, and I think obviously those apply to me too, but I feel like I'm really have a couple of students this semester who are so haunted by the ghosts of their physics or math past that they can't embrace what you know what I mean? They're just very kind of, yeah.
It's really easy to get some negative associations with a certain type of math or something like that and then get stuck in it, I imagine.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Absolutely. For sure. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So, getting students back on track. So what are you thinking about this with Ruth?
You know, I'm thinking about this, and I think putting some asset-based in my... We're getting a lot of opportunities to practice this at the moment, so there's
very
that.
Well phrased. I love it.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that works is inviting the student to get back on track.
Okay.
You know, and certainly not letting someone just drift away and being like, oh, well, that happened. But I think, and also kind of expressing confidence that they can get back on track. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing for me, which I don't know, I have mixed feelings about, but is offering an incentive to get back on track. So perhaps one thing I do maybe after the first midterm is if you do much better on the second midterm, we can change the weighting. So this will be the one that counts more, like the future one will count more. Mm-hmm. Or if someone has missed 3 reading assignments, I will sort of say, hey, if you don't miss a single other one, I'll make those zeros go away in the future, kind of thing.
Oh, nice.
And we can,
I see. Mm-hmm.
Focus
on moving forward. Yeah.
Right. And some kind of, because I think, I don't know what the point is, but there is a certain point sometimes where it's like, you physically can't do anything to pass, you know what I mean? And then there's really no point. And so definitely offering to make those changes. And I think in the beginning, earlier times when I tried to do that, I definitely stumbled and maybe offered too much, or it was oh, hey, seeing as you're trying, I'll just make this happen for you. And then that wasn't, you know what I mean? So there has to be, if you did this thing, then this nice thing could happen. And I really haven't got a good estimate about, but it's definitely less than 50% of the people actually get the thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
that's
but
interesting.
there's hope.
So some balance between offering a way forward and not making that way forward be unreasonably easy so that they get something without having actually learned the thing you want them to learn.
Right.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. Like I think really early on, say it was something like a reading assignment and I was like, oh, well, you know, because you're sorry, I'll just take away those zeros now and hopefully things will improve. And then they just didn't do any of the future ones. So it was like, you know what I mean? There needs to be a little bit of like, oh, I see you've shown you're really like back on track now. So I won't let this blip kind of impact your grade later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know what I
that
mean.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think in general, just sort of being open to students getting back on track and then motivating them and saying that it's possible for sure. But what about you? What works for you?
Well, that's really interesting. So a lot of similar things. Reaching out individually, I think helps them know. I think it helps them know that they're not just alone. But also it definitely breaks the ice. You know, a lot of times I'll email someone and say, hey, I just wanted to touch base because I see you haven't handed in the last couple assignments. How can I help you get back on track or something like that? And often they'll reply that they had been planning to reach out to me but hadn't really figured out what to say. And so then we're, you know, now we've got a conversation going. So that's good. And I always try to include offering to help with wherever they're stuck. You know, I'm like, whatever part you're stuck on, just send me an email immediately, you know? Like, my job is to help you get unstuck and finish the assignment. So, you know, not that always happens, but I hope to make it really clear that they're welcome to email me just to say, I do not know how to do part B or whatever, and then hopefully they'll be able to move forward. And then I also do tell them things like if they bring their grade up, I'll weight the later assignments more heavily. So that hopefully they don't feel like they're weighed down by previous poor grades. And that's kind of similar to dropping the lowest exam score or something like that.
I think, sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Well, I think I love that you're mentioning reaching out individually. And I think that's crucial because I think at some point, I think I definitely sent a generic email. And it just, because so many people are like, oh, she doesn't mean me and I'm too doomed and, you know, that kind of thing. Or like a lot of people go radio silent and they're like, oh, I'll just email her when I've finally done all these assignments.
Yes.
And it might not. I love that you're like, where are you stuck? Like that really like focuses instead of just like, I can't do anything. It's all doomed. Like there's an actual like, you know, there is a point there that's, you know what I mean? That you can like fix or address.
Do you not know where to start, or have you started, but then you didn't know how to do this one part? Yeah, where are you at? And then similarly, like once we've established a conversation, I try to make a plan with the student because I completely agree with you. A lot of students, the inclination is to say, I'll get all the missing stuff together and send it to you in one email, which is fine, except that's way too much, you know? And
it's not very likely.
If they could send one, you know, so I try to come up with a plan where it's like, okay, you know, where we have a plan for what they're going to do first. And as soon as they do that, they're going to submit it so that, you know, everything isn't hinging on them finishing everything. You know, they can do pieces at a time.
I think that's really, because it's like students get into this kind of magical thinking of like, and maybe we talked about this before, but like I definitely had a student who got behind on one lab and then trying to catch up on that, she got behind in the next lab and so on and so on. And then finally I was like, just skip this lab. Like, and she actually was such a hard worker and really like, then she was back on track and everything was fine. But the whole time where she was kind of scrambling to catch up, like sometimes it's just not very practical. And I like
that you say that. That is another thing that I tell students is, you know, if you missed a lab, just stay with the class. You know, if you have time, you know, depending on the late policy. This particular semester, I'm very flexible on late policy. So I would say skip this lab. Maybe you'll have time later in the semester to come back to it, and that's great. But for now, stick with the class. And then, you know, you're along with what everyone else is doing. It's the assignments you're working on fit with what I planned in the syllabus. And I think it goes a lot better that way.
Dude, yes, stick with the class. I want to like frame that because I feel like I'm just having this whole epiphany live, but that's so much of my actual philosophy of what students should be doing. And so often I get students who are like, oh, I have to miss class because I need to like prepare for this other test, or I have to miss class because I have to catch up on this lab or whatever. And it's like, don't do it, man, because it's just like grows. Like that gap between you and the rest of the class can grow so large. It's just, and I think, oh, that's so true. Like, and it kind of compounds problems, right? Because then they're like, if they're not with the class, they're not working with their group mates, or it's just like so magnifies things. So yes, I love that.
So even if it is like normally I have very strict deadlines, and sometimes I do even advise students, just forget about this one, take the 0 and carry on to the next ones. The other thing I wanted to say about that is this magical thinking. I mean, we're all we go.
No, not me.
It's not
totally
a student magical thinking kind of thing.
True.
How often do I have 7 days worth of stuff? I'm like, I can do that this afternoon. It'll be great. Imagine crossing all these off this afternoon. So I don't blame
thinking
them.
about the grant that's due tomorrow that I haven't.
Exactly. So, yeah. So I think it's our job. Part of our job is to help them come up with something reasonable, because really they have a much less experience with what's reasonable. We know the assignments intimately, and so I think that's an important part of getting them back on track, is coming up with a reasonable strategy together,
Yeah, that's really, really true. And I mean, and that's like a really solid life skill too.
It's true.
It's true. And yeah, I tried to, my daughter was super overwhelmed about something she had to do the other day. And I was trying to be like, I don't know where this expression comes from, but I was like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And she was like, what is wrong with you? Like, why would you eat? And she was just like so
She's like,
distraught.
I don't want to eat an elephant.
She's like, that's disgusting. I was like, oh, okay, never mind. But it was a good, well-intentioned, but it backfired.
That's so funny.
She was not into that.
She wasn't into
expression.
eating an elephant.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. So
well,
I
at
won't
least
say
got
that
her into a different mindset.
yeah. And she's like, leave me alone. I'm going to go do my work. You're disgusting. And so I was like, okay, that's a win.
Oh, man. So what are you working on with getting students back on track?
I think for me, what I'm working on is sometimes when is it too late? And when is it like, and I had other colleagues at various times who were very good at having a discussion with people where they're like, hey, friend, you're not going to pass. You should still come to class because it's going to make it easier the next time you take this class. And I find figuring out that line really difficult. And I think, some issues that we have in the classroom, maybe around biases and stuff, can come when professors tell people too early, hey, you're not going to make it, and I had a professor in grad school after I failed the test was like, you should think about becoming a kindergarten teacher.
Oh my gosh.
I know, which is sort of hilarious because I don't think kindergarten teachers are like failed physicists, but anywho, but it was just super like, wow, could you just give me a second? And then it like all worked out in the end. So it was kind of.
Yeah. So that's too early.
Way too early and bad and like just weird advice. But so I think that I have a hard time with is like, and I think I roughly think second midterm is when things have kind of gone a bit too far. And then when are you enabling delusions is another thing. So, and I feel like I've definitely gotten caught into this where people are like, yeah, so I'm going to do it. And you're like, yeah, okay. But really you're like, you're never going to do it. That's crazy talk. But again, when.
But do you know that it's crazy talk? It's hard to know.
I definitely have had a student where I was like, she's never going to catch up. Never. And she totally did because she was like a machine. And I did not verbalize that I didn't think she was going to do it, luckily. But then other times you're like, with all of my life experience, I know this is not going to go the way you think it is.
Sure.
But yeah.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And it reminds me, I remember teaching one class, somebody had been failing all the way up. We were 3/4 of the class through, and he was like, look, is there any chance of me passing the class? Like, say I did awesome on the final. And I was like, hey, if you can demonstrate that you know the concepts on the final, then that means you passed. And he did much, 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 much better on the final than he had done on any of the other exams. So that worked to motivate him. However, much, much, much better was still not passing because he was so far behind. So he really learned a lot, which was fantastic. But he just it was too late, He didn't know enough to be able to get a passing grade on the final. So I feel like I'm not sure whether I should have told him it was too late when we had that conversation, or whether I'm not sure. I mean, it's true that if he had shown me he knew all the stuff on the final, that would have been sufficient. So, yeah, that is a really interesting question, because you definitely don't want to demotivate somebody who might be about to pull out something like your former student who made it happen.
I think I might have shared this story before, but I had a student in my early days of teaching, and they were like totally failing everything. And then for the final, they were like, watch me, like I'm about to do this. And they totally failed the final. And they were like, but I studied for 7 hours this weekend. And I was like, oh my God. Like, but you have to multiply that by 10, because that's what everyone else has done for the entire 10 weeks of the quarter. And,
right.
You know, it was just like, yeah, I think, yeah, maybe having sort of a realistic conversation about this is going to be really hard work.
Totally.
People in your position often don't necessarily. I don't know.
I really like that. And I really like Ralph just wrote into us, can you tell your students, I support you as an outlier, but most people I've seen have not been able to do it from this point. And I think that is a good point. And maybe that would actually be motivating. They would say, gosh, this is a bad situation I'm in, but I am going to make it happen. And then if you know that you're going to have to be an outlier to make it happen, that might be really motivating to some students to make that happen. So I think that's a good idea. So they have the information.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. And I think, you know, because, I think they often sometimes, if they're in a really big hole, they'll finally catch up to start acting like all of the other students, but you're like, no, you have to be the outlier. Like, you have to go so far beyond that kind of.
Right, because you have to catch up to all the stuff that you missed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, especially the course I'm teaching at the moment is the first in the calculus-based physics sequence. And in the beginning, so much of my vibe is like, you can do it, friends. We're okay. We're going to make it. And then at some point, I do have to turn to, if you're kind of not putting in the effort at this point, it's probably not going to, so I don't know.
When you're saying, you can do it, friends, are you also telling them, like, you need to be putting in this much time or doing this many practice problems, or like giving them some context for what they need to do?
Somehow, and I think I managed to convey that information better last semester, but this semester I'm definitely struggling a little bit with that. But I wish I would go back and listen to our previous podcast episodes, because I'm sort of remembering saying to you, after the first midterm, or you know what I mean, things, and I'm coming up to that point now, so maybe I just need to hold my horses.
That's a good point.
And wait, but So tell me, what are you working on with this?
I'm working on increasing the proportion of students that my efforts work on. You know what I mean? Like, I have all these techniques that we talked about to get the students motivated again and give them a path forward. And I definitely think that a large number of the students I have this conversation with leave my office or leave our Zoom chat feeling motivated and like they can do it. But there's a higher percentage than I would like of them end up not getting back on track after that point, So I think for sure there's factors that are out of my control, definitely, and there's factors that are out of the students' control as well. This might just not be the semester that they're able to focus on the class. So that's fine. But I do wonder what else I might be able to do. And I wonder about late policies. And I wonder about being too flexible. So this whole year has been an experiment for me in being more flexible on my late policies. And I've been much, much more flexible. This whole year I've said, I've been very clear, I do not recommend that you fall behind. The deadlines are there to space out the assignments, yes, but they are also there very intentionally to pair the content that you're working on in your assignment with the content we're doing in the class. And if you get out of sync, you're not going to get as much out of it. Also, it snowballs. Do not plan on submitting anything late. Treat all these deadlines as very important. But if something comes up, there is flexibility. So I've been very clear about that. But I am incredibly flexible on the deadlines this semester. And I worry that might lead students to be late more often and then have more of a snowball effect and then be further behind. And then you've got this pile of work to do. And I wonder if I'm actually doing my students a disservice by being so flexible, maybe even particularly in a year where everything is crazy. So I'm just thinking a little bit about what other kinds of policies there could be. Like, you know, I usually in this class, I instead have a strict late policy, but I have one lab report is your super special late lab report. You can pick which lab report it is. It
I
can
like
be late.
that.
So yeah, you know, maybe you don't need to use it, maybe you do, but it's there for you. So I could have done that this semester. I decided to be super flexible instead. So something a little bit less flexible is kind of what I'm wondering if that would help students not be in the position of needing to get back on track, you know?
I love the you get one super
I do
special
enjoy
one.
that. And it's really
That's
fun
really
because,
cool.
you know, I go around collecting the lab reports and someone doesn't have one and I say, do you want to use your super special late report? And they're like, oh, no, I think I'll save that. I'll just take the late penalty, you know?
Oh, wow. So it's like a whole game show thing. I like it.
Yeah, it's really
That's
fun.
cool.
So,
I guess my first question for you is, do you think the number of students who don't follow up on that initial chat is bigger this year?
It's hard to know. I mean, definitely the number of students who get behind is bigger this year, but there's many more variables than my late policy this year.
So many more.
But I'm not sure if the proportion of them that we meet with and that don't end up succeeding from that point, I don't know if that proportion is higher or not this year.
You know, yeah, it's so tricky. I think I'm moving further and further away from flexibility, you know, and I think even I have there's a few people now who've gone past my point of handing in late stuff. So I've just started with zeros. So I think I really like your idea about the super special late one. I think it's funny with the dropping of scores because I actually feel like that can backfire.
Oh, yeah.
Someone was telling me they had you could drop 2.
Okay.
And they had a student who just didn't show up for the first 2 quizzes because they were like, well, that'll be my 2. And I was like, wow, that's confidence, probably very misplaced confidence that you're going to ace everything else. But
that's okay, isn't it? I mean, that's,
right. I mean, that's totally,
a lesson too.
Right, for sure. But
it's not the intention of the rule, but I don't think it's necessarily a problem that people decide to deal with it that way.
Part of my thinking is I feel like your course that you teach most is kind of tricky because it really, so it's I'm not going to describe it because it's like quantitative analysis, but it just seems like it's such a kind of metronome of you have to do all of these many, many pieces to it and you can't kind of wing it and then suddenly pull it all together at some point. You have to do these labs and so it just feels like a little bit of this. And I'd be interested how it would compare when you're teaching more of a general Chem 109.
Sure.
But I think this course in particular seems uniquely hard maybe for students to catch up. And I'm not sure it's to do with how you're doing it, if you know what I mean.
I think you're right. I think certainly in a intro level class, I think I would be more strict on my deadlines. And as we get higher up, I feel like the students have a better idea of what they need to do to learn the material. And so I feel like it's less important for me to be super structured with the deadlines. But that said, I think you're right that this class really builds on itself. And so getting behind snowballs extra quickly. And it's not like you can just forget about the stuff you missed and focus on the new stuff because you need the stuff you missed for the new stuff. So yeah, I see your point.
It seems like all of those labs are almost like small projects a little bit. And
they are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I'm going to go back to my stricter deadlines in the fall.
Well, and I have an experience teaching in another class, almost as frequently as the class I'm teaching at the moment. And it's very much in thirds. There's 3 separate sections. And so I have been able at times, if someone was so far behind, being like, okay, just move on to this bit. We'll deal with that later. It didn't carry on. You know what I mean? The 3 things are independent. And that was definitely a whole other experience than something that so builds upon itself.
So then they can nail the second part having been lost on the first part, but
Totally.
then hopefully they can go back to the first part, or how
Right.
does that work?
But there really is, I think I can have a much stronger message of turning over a fresh leaf.
Right.
You know, because
That
it's
makes
like, okay, put that behind you. You'll have to review it for the final, but for now, just move on to this
Focus
stuff.
on
So,
getting on a good roll. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, I think this is, I'm glad we talked about this. This is a tricky problem.
It is, and definitely something I'm thinking about a lot right now. So this is very timely for
Yeah.
me.
Lovely. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.